Well, good morning, everyone. My name's Bill Bergman, and I'm the Vice President for Public Affairs at Temple University, and I'm going to introduce our keynote speaker. But first of all, I'm not sure, she may have stepped out of the room, but I really want to thank Sarah Goldrick-Rab and her team for doing this today, and if we could all give her a round of applause. So it is my honor to introduce John B. King. And his life story is just a remarkable story. He attended New York City public schools, where his parents were career New York City teachers, but by the time he was 12, both of his parents had passed away. He credits the New York City public school teachers with giving him a rich and energized education experience, and they also gave him hope. And boy, did they give him hope. He went on to get a bachelor's degree at Harvard in government, a JD from Yale, and a master from Columbia. He began his teaching career in Puerto Rico and Boston. He also was a middle school principal. In 2011, he was named New York State Education Commissioner. In 2016, President Obama named Mr. King U.S. Secretary of Education. Obama said at the time he was an experienced educator, but cited his commitment to preparing every child for success. He currently is the president and CEO of Education Trust. The trust identifies and improves achievement gaps from preschool through college. There is no one better to be our keynote speaker today than John B. King. Mr. King.
Good morning, everybody. I am glad to be here with all of you and excited about today's conversation. Grateful for the warm introduction. Want to express, of course, gratitude to Temple and to the Wisconsin Hope Lab for the opportunity to be a part of today's conversation. I want to start with sort of my own personal connection to this work. As you heard, for me, school was the thing that saved my life. I'm only here in this role, only alive today because of the difference that New York City public school teachers made in my life. But I'm very conscious that I was blessed and lucky, and whenever I am meeting with students who are suffering, who are in foster care, who are homeless, who are hungry, who are incarcerated, I know there, but for the grace of God go I. And I know this experience of fearing what will come next in life, of being in the classroom distracted by all of the needs, the unmet needs that one suffers with. And so I come to this conversation with a genuine sense that the work that folks are doing in this room is the work of saving lives. That the work of making sure that students' basic security needs are met, that students have access to the food they need and the housing they need and the supports they need, that will be the difference between not just career success or not. That will be the difference for some students between life and death. And so that's what's at stake in today's conversation. You know, when I was secretary, one of the things that I most enjoyed doing was spending time meeting and talking with students. And some of the most powerful conversations I had were with students who had suffered from homelessness and had found a way to pursue higher education nonetheless. I think about a student, Gladys, who I met with, who had been homeless, is now studying at the Pennsylvania College of Health Sciences, not far from here. She is, and I was just talking with Barbara Duffield about this over the weekend on email, who's at Schoolhouse Connection. She told me that Gladys is on track to graduate this spring. And so her story is an inspiring story of what is possible, right? That Gladys was able to endure the things that she did and is now on track to graduation and becoming a nurse. That is a powerful example for all of us. But there's so much more work that must be done to ensure that that is possible for more students. We know, of course, that throughout this country, about 1 in 8 households in America has some level of food insecurity. We know that more than 1.3 million US students in our K-12 schools are homeless. We know that in order to combat the consequences of homelessness and hunger in higher education, we must do it in partnership with community-based organizations and with K-12. We know, for example, that a disproportionate share of the young people who are homeless in higher education were foster youth. Right? And so there is an intersection between these various policy challenges, and we can change the outcomes for students by the decisions we make. When you think about foster kids, we know when they're going to age out of the foster system. There is no one else responsible beyond the system if foster students end up homeless. That is a failure of the system. That is a failure of the adults. That is a failure of the bureaucracy. It is our responsibility to change that. And so when we think about meeting the challenges of homelessness and hunger on higher ed campuses, we can't think about it in the silo of higher education. We have to think about it as an interconnected problem. And we have to leverage the role of higher ed institutions, not only in changing the services that are available to students on campus, but in helping state agencies rethink their role and approach, helping community leaders, from mayors and council people to county executives, rethink their approach, helping community-based organizations and school districts rethink their approach. As we think about the college level, I'm so grateful to Sarah Goldrick-Robb for bringing so much more attention to this issue. I want to ask folks, she won't like this, but I want to ask folks to give her a round of applause for the way in which she has helped elevate this issue. We learned, for example, from the Hope Lab's most recent report that 2 in 3 community college students have at some point experienced food insecurity. Half are housing insecure, and nearly 14% are homeless. Those are staggering statistics that call for national resolve and action. We also know that disproportionately these challenges are faced not only by low-income students, but by students of color. The increased attention is mobilizing change in government. I'm encouraged by the fact that the Government Accountability Office has announced that they are going to undertake a study of the issue of food insecurity in higher education. I'm encouraged that we're going to have a growing body of research evidence, many in this room contributing to it, around the impact of housing insecurity and food insecurity on student success. This is urgent work. It's urgent work because we know the difference a college education makes in a young person's life or in a working adult's life. We know that a 2-year degree can help students earn nearly 20% more annually than just having a high school diploma. We know that over the course of a lifetime, an American with a college degree is likely to earn $1 million more in income. We know that 2/3 of the jobs that will be created over the next decade will require post-secondary training. That is what is at stake. That is why this work is so urgent. We know, too, that increasingly the students who are in higher education are much more diverse than people assume. Too often the notion of what is higher education is framed by the notion of an affluent white student straight from high school on a leafy New England campus. And while that is a portion of who is in higher education, certainly there is a tendency to focus on those students, that is not reflective of who is in higher education today. We know that over the last 12 years, the number of students who are also parents while in higher education has grown from 1.1 million to 4.8 million. We know that about 1/4 of undergraduates are single parents. We know that even as the doors of higher education have opened wider, costs continue to go up. We know, for example, that over the last 2 decades, room and board costs have increased by 54% at public 4-year institutions and 14% at 2-year colleges. At the same time, we know that many states are disinvesting from public higher ed. One of the things Vice President Biden would often say is, don't tell me what your values are, show me your budget, and I'll know what your values are. Right? But we know that over the we did a study at the Education Department while I was there that showed over the last 3 decades, the rate of increase in spending on corrections is 11 times the rate of increase in spending on public higher education. We are choosing as a country to invest in prison rather than to invest in education. Right? That is an expression of values. And we're making the wrong values choice. That's why the work here today is so urgent, because we've got to shift how we think about the challenges we face as a country. We also know that the effects of housing insecurity and food insecurity for students are quite significant. They increase the likelihood that students will suffer from stress, anxiety, and depression. They have a real health consequence. They also increase the likelihood that students will not complete. We know, for example, from emerging research from the University of Wisconsin-Madison that housing insecurity during a student's first year of college is associated with a nearly 10% reduction in the probability of degree attainment. We also know that in more than 100 cities around the country, policy decisions criminalizing the status of being housing insecure or homeless is having a terrible effect on the choices that students are forced to make. For many homeless college students, this reality can drive risky behaviors like sleeping on the roofs of buildings or in the shadows of bridges and abandoned lots for fear of being arrested for the crime of being housing insecure or homeless. Think about the values message that sends for our society. Think about the consequences that has for students each day. So this challenge, though, is being met by many in this room through creative strategies on campuses. I think about the campuses that are launching food pantries, some that are mobile food pantries to make sure that students have access to healthy, nutritious food. I think about the University of Northern Colorado in Greeley that's established the Bear Pantry, which has as a goal not only providing access to food, but trying to lessen the stigma associated with utilizing the service by making sure that any enrolled student can receive up to 5 food and toiletry items at the pantry twice per week. I think about the work at Oregon State University and their Services Resource Center, a food pantry plus model. Center not only provides students with food, but also helps them apply for the SNAP program. The center helps students to become more self-sufficient and food secure by offering cooking classes, resources to find free meals on campus, and opportunities to participate in agricultural programs in exchange for food. There are many places that are taking seriously the need to support parents who are on campus. I think about Kentucky, where they opened the Eastern Scholar House as a place where single parents who are enrolled in college can live with their children at a reduced cost. And that work is in partnership. Again, partnership has a crucial role in this work, in partnership with the Kentucky Housing Corporation, a community-based organization, as well as institutions of higher ed. Think about the places that are providing childcare on campus through Head Start or through university-sponsored services like Valencia College in Florida. There are the institutions that are helping to support off-campus housing for students who are housing insecure. Think about organizations like the Southern Scholarship Foundation in Florida that's been engaged in work to support college students, they are in the house, to support college students experiencing housing insecurity for decades. Since 1955, the Southern Scholarship Foundation has awarded hundreds of rent-free housing scholarships to students at 7 community colleges and universities across the state. Think about the work that California State University system is doing on single points of contact to make it easier for students to access services and supports. These are important institutional decisions, and they must be accompanied by better public policy choices by states and the federal government. We also know that there are things individual faculty members can do. I think about Sarah's call recently for folks to include on their syllabi a message about basic needs and security to help students access right, the supports that are often available on campus, and also to reduce the stigma around accessing those supports. Now that trend took off. In fact, I'm teaching an education policy class at University of Maryland to undergraduates this year, and I made sure to put the basic needs insecurity message on my syllabus. I hope every faculty member in the room did the same. Yeah, that's right, we can applaud that, that's right. Jack Norton, a history instructor at Normandale Community College in Minnesota, took this idea a few steps further. On his course syllabus, he shares information about resources such as the campus food pantry and local homeless shelters. He also, I love this, includes a map identifying local establishments that offer free internet access. And he does everything he can to ensure that students' basic needs and security will not get in the way of their learning, including making sure that all the materials required in the course are available through openly licensed educational materials. But even again, as we celebrate these acts by institutions and individual faculty members, we need policy change. And policy change means that we need to look at every federal policy in housing and in food and in higher education and ask, could we be doing more to address the needs of our students and increase their likelihood of success? I believe students need greater access to more flexible federal and state financial aid for college and expanded work-study programs that can ease the economic burden of higher education for students who are experiencing the greatest challenges. Any college affordability initiative must ensure that disadvantaged students, including those who are homeless, as well as our part-time students, are able to prioritize their education without having it be in competition with their basic needs. I believe we should explore how we could put in place a meals program similar to the one that is present in K-12 to try to take the issue of food insecurity, at least during the day, out of the equation, right? If we had a program like free and reduced price lunch available on higher ed campuses, we would be in a different place. We know that the SNAP program in too many places has obstacles to students taking advantage, including work requirements that are in tension with completing their higher education. That's a policy choice. We could change that, and we should. We know that there is more that can be done by the Department of Housing and Urban Development to make sure that supports for housing are more available in partnership with higher ed institutions to help students to finish school and get on the right track for their lives. We also know that there's much more that institutions can do. As many institutions as we celebrated for their food pantries and their housing programs, we know in too many institutions, those are not available. Right? There are concrete steps that institutions can take. So even as we celebrate those who've done the right thing, we know that there is more to do. We also have to avoid policies that point us in the wrong direction. I think about the states that have put in place outcomes-based funding that does not take into consideration student need. To the extent that a state puts in place a performance funding system that rewards schools for serving the most affluent students who are likely to succeed anyway, the state creates exactly the opposite incentives that we would want in higher education. We should be rewarding institutions for enrolling more low-income students. We should be rewarding institutions for putting in place more supports for the students who are most vulnerable, not the opposite. And sadly, in too many states, performance funding is doing the opposite. We also know that there's more that philanthropy and business can do, from the folks who provide food service, who could be doing more to make sure that meal cards and other opportunities are available to food insecure students, to the choice that foundations make and philanthropists to invest disproportionately in the most elite institutions rather than those that are engine of social mobility. In fact, Gail Mello, who's at LaGuardia Community College, recently wrote a piece in the New York Times where she pointed out that in the last year, more than $41 billion was given in charity to higher education, but a quarter of that philanthropic giving went to just 20 institutions, right? So philanthropists, donors, are making a choice about where their resources go, and they are choosing to send their resources to the institutions that serve oftentimes the most affluent students. Everyone in this room should also be a loud voice in support of the Pell Program. The Pell Program, that's right. We know that the current administration, has proposed raiding billions of dollars from the Pell Program. Pell money should be for Pell students, Pell dollars for Pell students. But we also know, that's right, we also know that Pell has been indexed to inflation over the last few years, and that will end without congressional action. At the Education Trust, we organized a letter from institutional leaders around the country calling on Congress to permanently index Pell to inflation. It is already at a 40-year low in terms of the cost of education that it covers, and that will get worse next year without indexing to inflation. And as we reached out to institutional leaders, one of the things I was struck by is not everyone realized that Pell indexing was ending this year without congressional action. So it's important for all of us to organize to increase the maximum Pell Grant, but also to ensure that Pell is linked to inflation so it doesn't lose buying power over time. Ultimately, all these things that I've suggested, whether it's on the things that HUD could be doing differently or the things we could be doing differently in the SNAP program or increasing Pell Grants, these are all a part of the solution, but I acknowledge they are incremental. President Obama used to say that good is better. He'd always remind us, good is better, because sometimes folks can advocate for the perfect in ways that make it impossible to achieve the good. So we should advocate for those incremental improvements. But I want to close by suggesting that we actually need to fundamentally rethink the social contract in the United States. Right? We know that 2/3 of the jobs that are being created, as I mentioned, are being created with a requirement for post-secondary education. We know that having a college degree not only positions someone for better success in the economy, but is associated with positive health outcomes, positive life outcomes. It is associated with the opportunity to engage as a citizen more fully. Given that we know that, we should change the social contract to guarantee access to high-quality higher education for all of our people. And we know that's possible. President Obama proposed something called America's College Promise, the idea that 2 years of community college would be, that's right, 2 years of community college for free would be guaranteed by the federal government in partnership with states. And we couldn't get Congress there, but it was the right proposal. We also know that there are states that are engaged in this work. I think about the state of Tennessee that has promised tuition-free access to community college for all their high school graduates. And importantly, Governor Haslam, Republican governor with a Republican legislature, so this isn't a partisan point, he has actually now expanded the Tennessee Promise program to Tennessee Reconnect so that folks who have some college credits but no degree can go back to community college for free in the state of Tennessee. Right? That's powerful. We know there are more than 37 million Americans who have some credits and no degree. Think what could be accomplished if states would make a commitment similar to the commitment that Tennessee has made. Right? We could rethink the social contract in that way. We could also rethink the social contract by saying, we know it's not just about tuition. Right? Part of why we're all here is because tuition assistance, tuition free even, is not enough for the students who are most economically vulnerable. Room and board matters. Resources for books matter. Right? We also know that students need supports to finish. In too many places, the conversation about free tuition is not focused on the range of supports that our most vulnerable students, our first-generation students, low-income students, students of color, homeless students, food insecure students, foster care students need. Right? So it's not just tuition and room and board, it's also quality academic advising, it's also quality counseling, it is connections with a first-generation faculty mentor, right? It's help in navigating guided pathways, and we know it's doable. I think about the work that CUNY ASAP has done, showing that with the right set of supports, including transportation support, CUNY has been able to double the completion rate for students required to take a remedial course in community college. That's a randomized controlled trial, right? This is evidence-based policy. Why are we doing CUNY ASAP-like programs on every community college campus throughout the country? We could make that choice if we thought in the right way about the social contract. One last point about the social contract. As I walked in, was just finishing up a call with Senator Murray and Randy Weingarten from the AFT and Lily Escalon-Garcia from the NEA, calling on Congress to pass the DREAM Act, right? DACA students need to be protected. Part of the social contract is our kids need to have the opportunity to go on to higher education, to go on to the workforce. DACA kids, DACA young people are our kids. They are as American as any of us except for some paperwork. And what we need to do is have Congress protect them through passage of the DREAM Act, right? Part of the social contract is also making sure that campuses are welcoming and supportive places. All of us watched a few weeks ago as the KKK and Nazis marched across a college campus. Right? All of us watched as the current president tried to create a moral equivalence between racists and those protesting against racism. All of us watched and are watching as the country fails to adequately respond to the suffering in Puerto Rico and in the Virgin Islands. Right? We're at this moment where the message being sent to our students, whether it's the young person straight from high school or the working mom coming back to school, the message being sent to students too often is one of hate and intolerance. Campuses have a responsibility as part of that social contract to make sure that campuses are safe and supportive environments for all of our students, for our undocumented students, for our students who are parents, for our students who've been in foster care, for our students who are LGBTQ, right? All of our campuses have a responsibility to send a clear message to every student: you belong here, and we will support your success here. And so that's what a new social contract could look like. But it starts with people being seen, right? And part of the power of this convening is seeing the challenge that our students face. Too often, students who are hungry, students who are not sure where they're going to sleep that night, feel scared and alone and invisible. And the power of this room is to say, you will not be invisible. We see you, we are here to help you, and we will make it different. Thanks so much for the opportunity to join me.
Thank you so much. I don't know if I'm on. Can you all hear me? All right. John's agreed to take a few questions, and we have about 15 minutes. So I'm looking for folks in particular who didn't get to ask questions during the last session. The folks on the sides, you're absolutely welcome to have a question. And please tell us who you are before you ask former secretary a question. Who's up? Okay.
Hello. Good to see you.
You had the opportunity to do this work at many levels, state level, now, and trust. Can you give us guidance around what are the things that you think that we can be doing to continue to further the conversation beyond the evangelists in the room? There are those of us that are already on board. And we do a lot of talking to each other, but I'd love to hear your perspective now that you've kind of at this higher conversations with those who understand and who don't understand. What can we all be doing to be more outward facing about issues of homelessness and food insecurity, advocating for the Pell Grant? Can you give us some guidance if you were creating that call to action and giving us our marching orders, what would that look like?
Wow, that's a great question. Thank you. Three things. One is having the data is powerful, right? And then this is certainly a part of Sarah's work, but those campus surveys, gathering the information so that we can tell the story. Too often people think homelessness and food insecurity are not a problem on their campus or in their community. Right? People are unaware of the scope of the problem. And so part of what we all need to do is gather that data so that we can make the case that there is a problem to be solved. We need to gather it for campus administrators. We need to gather it for state legislators. We need to gather it for mayors and city councils and county executives. And we need to gather it for members of Congress. But we need to be able to tell the story about the dimensions of the problem. That's one. Two, we need to do this work in coalition, and we need to be aggressive about building a coalition. You know, where is the civil rights community on these issues, right? Have we engaged the Urban League and La Raza, or now Unidos US? Have we engaged the local affiliates? You know, I think about some of the work that's going on in Tennessee around educational equity is being championed by an organization called Conexión América. Their focus is on services for the Latino community and the immigrant community, but they have actually led a coalition of the business community and the civil rights community to champion education equity. All right, so we need the civil rights community, we need the business community, we need the chamber and the statewide business council. Oftentimes they can get into meetings that maybe some of us who are advocates couldn't get into because of who they are and because of the relationships they have. That's powerful. Having business at the table, faith leaders, and this is in a bipartisan way. You know, some of the best work, progressive work that is happening in the country is being supported by conservative faith leaders who understand what is at stake in the possibility of people having better lives. I think about some of the criminal justice reform work that's happening in Texas, supported by conservative faith leaders with whom I may disagree on other issues, but who take seriously that incarceration should be about expanding opportunity for folks when they come back. And then the third piece is to be political. You know, when I was a teacher and a principal, I have to admit, it's weird given what I've chosen to do with the rest of my life, but when I was a teacher and a principal, I hated when politicians would come to school, right? Especially when I was a principal, I'd say, oh, another elected official, I gotta walk them around on the tour. I just wanna do my work. But the work is political, and so we need to make sure that we are engaged with state legislators, with Congress people. I hope some in this room will choose to run for office. Right, we've got to change the political conversation.
Okay. Let's go ahead right here. She's got it.
Hi, John. My name is Jessica Sutherland. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Homeless to Higher Ed. And I have a question that faces a lot of my students. As you mentioned, the Pell program is not keeping pace with college costs, and also the PLUS loan program has allowed costs to skyrocket, and schools are allowed to say that they're meeting financial aid with this program. But unfortunately, undergraduate dependents are only eligible for the Parent PLUS loan, unless they can get a dependency override, with which a lot of financial aid counselors are very resistant to grant them. What can we do to help kids fill this necessary gap when their parents are, one, either unable to get the credit approval because they've got like a cell phone collection on their credit rating, or they're unwilling to make that investment in their child? How can we change the loan programs? Because I don't work in policy, I work student-facing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the things that we tried to work on during the Obama administration, trying to make it easier, for example, for homeless students to be able to access financial aid, because some of them, there were process obstacles. And I'm proud that we tried to reduce those, but it's not enough. Ultimately, we've got to get Congress to a different place. We are fortunate that Senator Murray actually cares tremendously about these issues and has been a real leader in Congress on trying to look out for how we better protect the needs of homeless students, foster youth, housing insecure youth, low-income young people who aren't able to take full advantage of some of the federal student aid programs. So she's a partner in that. We got to move the rest of Congress there. And the opportunity in this room is, institutional leaders matter, right? Your campus president sitting down with your senator, your House member for your institution matters. It's different from the letter from the Association of College Presidents, right? There's something powerful about the local leader, and then think about the trustees of the individual institutions and the business partners who support activity at the institutions and the alumni of the institutions. Those folks coming together to say to members of Congress, this is what we need, these are the problems in the way that financial aid is provided, that is quite powerful. And we need that at the federal level, and we also need that at the state level. But it is doable, and I think Tennessee is an example of that. There are other places around the country, and Sarah and I both have critiques of how other states maybe are approaching the notion of free tuition. But there is real momentum around people rethinking the role of the state or the city in helping students get through higher education. And we've got to be at those tables talking about how we do that work in a way that looks out for exactly the students that you're describing and the situations that you're describing. But I think it is doable if we're willing to be political about it.
Okay, now we're going to do the thing where we take 3, and then we'll let you kind of deal with those. Okay, so let's do one from the back right behind there. We've got one. Okay, so you'll go ahead first. You're going to go second. And wow, you're really excited over here. Okay. Yes, that'll be 3. Okay, go ahead. Yes.
What I would love.
Say who you are. I'm sorry.
Hi,
please.
my name is Melanie Lucero. I'm from a Wesley House student residence in San Diego, California. We're a nonprofit. But I would like to know, I would like a playbook from you on how to get our local university more involved with our student homeless problem than their new football stadium. Okay. So they just raised $750 million, and they're doing 0 with their homeless program.
Got it. Good question. Okay, there's a young man over here. Therese, right over here in the red.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Tyrell Mann Barnes. I'm a student at Temple University. I guess my question would be, how do we get students more involved in this conversation? So far we've talked a lot about professionals and bringing them to the table, but how do we use the power of student testimony in this discussion?
That's great. And last one, is Stephanie? Yes.
Hi. My question pertains to the work rule for students in obtaining SNAP benefits. As a politician, do you have any advice for us to make that happen? In terms of, you've got students for every unit, they're expected to work 3 hours, and I just don't understand why that isn't enough to say that they're working 36 hours a week already in school. So is there anything you can do to help us make that happen?
All right, so I'll try to answer all 3 of those briefly. So I actually think the second question and the first question are related. I don't know that there's a perfect playbook to shift our cultural priorities on campuses. But I do think having students and alumni involved helps. So I was just at an event with Sean Donovan, who was Secretary of Housing and Urban Development during the Obama administration and then ran the Office of Management and Budget. And he was telling me the reason he got interested in housing was working at the homeless shelter that Harvard students run as an undergrad, right? And I know we've got folks in the room who are working on projects to get undergrads to share their meal cards, right, with other undergrads who are food insecure. So I think this question of how we mobilize young people on campus as a force is a powerful one. You know, when you think about South Africa and when young people got active on campuses around whether or not their universities were doing business with South Africa, that was very powerful. So I think getting young people on campus, students, it could be older students, involved in services for homeless and food insecure folks can be very powerful because those students then become advocates with their faculty members and with the administration. Alumni who've experienced homelessness and food insecurity have a powerful story to tell and need to be active in those campus conversations. The reality is, when campuses are figuring out who's going to be the president of the Alumni Association, those folks disproportionately, we know, come from the most wealthy, and they are often focused on sports on many campus, right? But those who are interested in the campuses focusing in other ways have to be active, right? The students who are alums who are engaged in progressive advocacy work, they got to be active in their alumni associations too. So trying to move the forces within the institution so that there's pressure on institutional leaders to better serve homeless and food insecure students, I think is part of the playbook. I also think faculty members being active on this issue, as many of you are, is a powerful force, and persuading other faculty members to care, and it's part of why we need the data to help them understand the scope of the problem. On the issue of SNAP, and one thing about the framing of the conversation, I don't think of myself as a politician. I am now a civil rights activist, maybe recovering politician. But look, this is a very fundamental question that goes beyond the specific policy question. A thing about us as Americans is we tend to have this kind of Horatio Alger-itis, right? This notion that if people would just pull themselves up by their bootstraps, why we have work requirements, and not just for the SNAP program, but often the case for work requirements is made with this Horatio Alger notion. But I think maybe it was Dr. King who said, it's cruel to talk about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps to someone who doesn't have boots, right? So part of what we have to do is make the case about student success, what it takes for students to succeed. Because to the extent that the work requirements get in the way of students being able to eat and students being able to finish, right, we're actually undermining the very goals of the policy. And so I do think we have to make a data and evidence-based case. Yes, and look, so we need the government to help with that evidence-based case, we need institutions to help with that evidence-based case, and we need philanthropy to help with that evidence-based case. You got representatives of all of those in the room, but we got this room is 4 times larger than last time, right? So next time it's got to be 8 times larger, right? Because we got to keep building the coalition. Yeah.
All right, well, please join me in thanking John King for being here. Thank you so much.